Before we dive into our speaker panel, I want to take also a few minutes to reintroduce for many of you, but maybe for someone who is joining the first time CLI sessions, to introduce a framework that will serve as our shared lens throughout this session, the Collective Leadership Compass, which will help us to answer these two overarching conference questions. What does collective leadership look like in times of conflict, and how collective leadership can enhance our peace-building efforts in different places of the world? I already mentioned that I started to work with CLI in 2017 when CLI came to Ukraine to actually work with communities that were affected by the hybrid war in 2017, working in the provinces close to the contact line. And that was the first time when the compass was introduced to me, when I started to work with this framework. And this gives me a privilege to see and reflect how the compass has evolved through this almost 10 years of me working with this framework. The compass was developed to help groups, organizations, networks, communities to work together more effectively towards sustainability goals, complex goals, and it maps 6 dimensions, which you can see on the slide. Those dimensions help us to reflect what makes collaboration come alive, what can bring aliveness into the systems. And today we are going to use a compass slightly differently, not just as a tool for effective collaboration or bringing collaboration, but as a lens for a peace-building leadership. And let us go very quickly through the 6 compass dimensions and some questions that are guiding our reflection on how to enliven collaborations of different kinds. So we usually start with the future possibility dimension, with a question: what inspires us to shape the future collectively? And in peace-building times, in peace-building efforts, this dimension is often one of the hardest and most essential questions. What future we are actually building toward together, what the future brings us to do collective effort, and what inspires us to do that collective effort. With the engagement dimension here, we are thinking about not just inviting usual voices to the table, but also asking who is missing, whose presence would change everything. And in conflict settings, this question becomes super urgent and sometimes even dangerous. We had these reflections I mentioned earlier when we worked with colleagues from Belarus who were endangered by the stakeholders in their own country, and engaging people from different contexts, from different sectors, may sometimes mean to push ourselves to cross deep divides in the society. In the innovation dimension, we ask here ourselves what innovative approaches exist or need to be fostered. But for the peace-building or conflict contexts, it often requires to question standard approaches, which are sometimes inadequate or irrelevant for peace-building. And this dimension asks us to stay curious and to look into what is already working in our communities. We already have a lot of peace-building practices which are coming from our ancestors, from our history, but also to create spaces for new solutions to emerge, even when we are under pressure. The humanity dimension is perhaps the most counterintuitive and countercultural dimension in professional settings. It often requires from us as CLI people, when we work with professionals, public authorities, a bit more push and efforts to bring this dimension into the table. And it should remind us that collaboration, especially in conflict setting, it's not just a technical process. It requires emotional truth, dignity, courage, to be human with one another and to overcome dehumanization. I think the first session touched quite a lot about those dehumanizing trends and how important it is to create spaces to overcome those. In the collective leadership dimension, we ask ourselves how can we leverage diverse perspectives, expertise, and competences. And this also means recognizing that local knowledge, lived experience, and formal expertise can also stand together in one space and sometimes contribute to the same shared goals and shared vision. And finally, the wholeness. Dominic started with the wholeness in his check-in. How can our work contribute to the larger sustainability narrative, peace-building narrative? And this reminds us that every collaboration and every peace-building effort exists within a larger system. Again, something that struck me in the first session was an insight that when the conflict starts in some of the points on our planet, it affects all of us. It doesn't matter if it happens in Northern Hemisphere or Southern Hemisphere, we all will be affected with the conflict. And wholeness dimension help or reminds us to keep this broader picture in mind when we step into any peace building process. Before I hand over to the panelists, I want us to have a short break before we go there and listen to the stories and sit a bit with some honest discomfort, as the compass was built for collaboration. It assumes a degree of safety, trust, shared willingness to engage and to work together. But when we come with this intention into conflict-affected situation, we always face a lot of dilemmas, peace-building dilemmas, where we should take decisions and maybe have some compromises with ourselves. So these dilemmas, I was thinking about them since first exposed to the collective leadership compass, and I will just maybe do another round around the 6 dimensions, putting those dilemmas into our space and inviting you to think about them when you listen to our panelists. I believe we will see a lot of answers to those uncomfortable questions. So in the future possibilities dimension, when survival is a present for a community, how do we hold a collective vision for the future? How can we stick to this collective vision? In the engagement dimension, how do we engage across lines of active hostility, fear or trauma, or even direct physical threat? In the innovation dimension, how do we foster new approaches when risk is already there and it's overwhelming? How can we create and support this curiosity when there is a lot of threat? In the humanity dimension, how do we create spaces for shared humanity when people have been actively dehumanized? In the collective intelligence, how do we honor diverse perspectives when some perspectives are held by those causing a real harm and real danger? And in the wholeness perspective, how do we connect to a larger narrative when the immediate reality is fragmentation for our community? So I really invite us to keep those questions in mind as they are real dilemmas for peace-building practitioners. I believe that our speakers will give us a lot of insights how we can approach those dilemmas on personal initiative and systems level. And I also believe that in a couple of minutes after the round of discussion and presentation, we will feel ourselves a bit more comfortable with those questions and with moving forward to a sustainable peace.